35, where Betsy left off. Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out. When he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What, are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim to see, your guilt remains." The great Reverend Dr. John Calvin, the father of my theological tradition, the Presbyterians, the right, the just, the orthodox. We are taught by Calvin about this particular passage as he wrote a couple of different times, looking at it saying, God sometimes has a purpose in mind other than punishing men's sins when he sends them afflictions. And it's one of the few times I look at Calvin and say, no. God doesn't punish us with afflictions this way to teach us something, John. And if he does, then I'm going to be arguing with both you and with God once I have that opportunity face to face. Because I can't help but read passages like this and find myself a bit uncomfortable, a bit nauseous, a bit frustrated with the disciples, the Pharisees, all of the people who are seeking to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. I fully admit I do want to blame. I also want to get to the root cause of problems in our world and figure out whose fault it is that something happened, that someone allowed something to occur, that bad things happen all around us. And so in those cases, I do identify with the disciples about the cause of the man's affliction, but my goodness, I hope it's just not so easy as to say, well, God makes people blind to teach us a lesson. Or God brings some sort of disaster upon a particular city because, well, it'll help us be better in the future. Or God, let that child die so that your faith might grow. That's not my God. That's certainly not the God that I want to celebrate today and going forward. No, I like more my God who's in this passage, who is less concerned with the reason for things and far more interested in making things better in the moment and fixing the problem and talking about what we're going to do with the present circumstance. Asking why is this man blind is not nearly as important as healing the man's blindness. I find it natural, though, for a lot of us to want to place blame on someone or something when things don't go our way or they go in some unexpected way. Last Sunday evening was the Super Bowl. A lot of us watched, and we saw a very familiar sight once again as Tom Brady is out there with the Patriots. And I know even the most casual NFL fans know that it's the Super Bowl, so 50-50 chance Tom Brady is going to be there with the Patriots. And it's a little frustrating for a Lions fan or for those of us who have actually experienced real suffering to watch yet again now people from the East Coast, Philadelphia and Boston. My goodness, what has the world come to? I don't want to celebrate either of those places. But I will, and I'll watch, and I'll join in, and believe it or not, an actually good football game broke out, and it was fun to watch. And at the end, it felt like last year. Patriots are down, but Tom Brady's there. They're going to win, right? Because that's what he does. And instead, they lost. And the Eagles win. And the next day on Sports Talk Radio, I find myself tuning in to listen to people telling me why the Patriots lost, not why the Eagles won. And that was the conversation. Well, this injury. Or do you remember that game early in the year? Or they should have practiced this particular thing. Or it was that one play. And they give every excuse possible, trying to identify how it is that the Patriots could have lost this game. At the end of the day, the most compelling reason for why the Patriots lost, after 4 quarters of football, the Eagles scored more points than they did. Hooray! And lives were changed. Some people get new jobs, some people are fired, people are celebrating, people are mourning. Things happen because of that game. it really doesn't matter at the end of the day why they lost. They did. And now things are different, and what are you going to do about it? Delicacy is required in preaching the Word of God from this healing story, along with so many other miraculous stories throughout the Gospel of John. You see, because John does miracles in a way that make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. He does things like leading off Jesus' whole ministry with turning water into wine. And we're supposed to see the great miracle in that. But my goodness, wouldn't it have been better, instead of turning this water into wine to give to people who had already been drinking, how about maybe bring that clean water to the poor who were outside the party, who could really use water, not wine? And this man who's blind that you've given sight to, it's good, but I actually wish that he was a little more faithful. Maybe the man prayed really hard, and this is an example for us of how prayer is answered. Or when we see any of the other miraculous healings and bringing people back to life in the Gospel of John, there's always a conversation afterwards. It's not just you do this good thing and this thing happens. It's complicated. It's nuanced. We see sinners and saints alike who have good and bad things happen to them. And it's dizzying, it's confusing, and it's a bit confounding, I'd say, for all of us trying to make sense of faith. And then looking at it, of course, through that first century perspective, we get these really strange passages where we see people connecting physical infirmities to their level of faithfulness or sin. And while it seems a bit comical for us to do that these days, we understand that at that time, ethics, moral conundrums, and your physical well-being were all mingled together into one great science. So why is someone blind? I don't know, maybe their mom cut somebody off in the camel lane down the street there in Bethlehem. Why is that person lame? Because their dad didn't give enough at the synagogue when he was a young man. You come up with all sorts of things that seem outrageous and crazy, but we do similar things and allow ourselves to get away with it. We have systems in our midst that are corrupt, that are wrong, that are just outright bad, and they happen. And we seem to shrug them off and say, well, that's just the way things are. That's politics. That's religion. That's relationships. That's whatever makes us feel better when we hurt someone or when we create something that allows some voices to be heard and other voices to be silenced. Jesus refuses to lay blame on anyone for the man's blindness. Instead, he declares that the man's affliction is this opportunity for a conversation now, and certainly an opportunity for grace and for mercy. Now keep in mind, it is true that sin and sinfulness can and do lead to suffering. Our broken relationships, our lies, our general sinful attitude, it does lead to suffering in this world. However, our suffering is not necessarily related to our sin. There are times we suffer, and it's not because we did something. There are other times when it is. After dismissing the question about who is to blame, Jesus moves on to the more pressing matter at hand. What are we going to do about it? Because laying blame, responsibility, and fault does not change, right, or correct the situation. Instead, there's a man in darkness who cannot see. Let's give him light and help him to see now. The community needs to be enlightened by some type of truth. Therefore, let's bring that truth to the surface. Let's deal with it and see what comes next. This last week, I was helping my orthodontist pay for a new boat by giving Denali some braces. And while I was there, the orthodontist comes out from this, fifth or sixth visit we've had. They made some adjustments, and she's got a new expander. The way it's in her mouth is different. And the hygienist comes out and is speaking to Denali and me, but really to me, and explaining what's going on. And Denali, in her 11 and a half years, says, this doesn't feel right. And the orthodontist or the hygienist, whoever it is, looks at me and says, she's going to say that, but it's really okay. Denali has a look on her face that seems a bit pained, and she says, no, it's just not sitting right. It doesn't feel like it's in there. It's loose. Again, the hygienist looks at me and says, she's going to think that, but that's not really the case. Now, I never had braces. I never had orthodontics because my parents didn't sin. And when The orthodontist looks at me and says, your daughter is going to say that, but that's okay. I actually got a bit annoyed and looked at her and said, she's right here. She's 11, and I tried to be a little more gentle about it then. Denali, I'm sure, will correct my behavior afterwards. But you can talk to her. She knows her mouth better than I know her mouth. Don't ask me and don't tell me it's okay. Talk to my 11-year-old daughter. And you can see a bit of annoyance on that hygienist or orthodontist's face, but she finally goes through with it. We talk it out. We figure out what we're going to do next. You see, she has agency in this. We see the parents do the same thing with the man who's blind here in the synagogue. They go to the parents and say, is this your son? Was he really blind? And I like them sort of pointing the finger and saying, you know what? You should ask him. It's his truth. It's his story to tell. It's his experience, not ours. Go ahead and ask him. If you don't like the answer, that's your problem. But he's telling you the truth. We are in the midst of a system that has collapsed around us. And it's not just MSU. It is in our school districts, it's in our workplaces, and it's certainly in the rest of our nation. When we have students who speak out and say, this happened to me, and this doesn't seem right, and we as adults look at our children or look at our students and say, oh, honey, please, it's not that bad, or maybe you didn't hear it right. We live in a system where junior faculty are denied tenure or are treated unfairly by their faculty advisor, their dean, the chair, because, I know you think that you're being treated unfairly, but it's not about your race, it's not about your gender. Just wait your turn, and please don't cause a problem and make our department be on somebody's radar. We live in a system where we can look at a president and blame her and say it's your fault for letting this happen, but just as easily she can look back and say, well, what about the president before me? What about the president before that? What about the provost? What about the alumni? What about the system that we all want to continue? We live in a world where a woman's voice is not heard the same way a man's voice is. We live in a world where a person of color is not able to have the same acceptance, the same understanding, and the same validity as a white person. None of these are okay. I didn't make them happen. I hope I'm not still responsible for continuing to let these things happen. But they did happen, and they do happen. And we're all blind to it. And so now I'm saying, along with so many others, look at the light of Jesus Christ shining on us, and we can see now. Now we should do something. And it doesn't matter so much who is to blame, as much as who can do something different now and make things better. Jesus Christ does not point his finger so much as to say, let's continue condemning, let's continue seeking vengeance, and let's continue bringing people down, as much as he identifies the sin, identifies the problem, heals and makes things better, and then says, now what are you going to do with that sight? Our eyes are being opened here, certainly in East Lansing and surrounding our blessed university. But this university is not the only one with the problems that we're observing. We are not alone. And I know a lot of people from ESPN to political figures to alumni from other schools would love to talk about the Spartan problem. This is a cultural problem that's been created by far more people than just our parents who sinned, or us who sinned, or anyone else around us. I can't change that, but I can make things better now. And so going forward, I think the call is very clear for all of us, and it is biblical. It's theological. Listen to those who might otherwise not have a voice. Listen and hear. See those people who are waving their arms saying, look what has happened. See them, and then give them sight as well, and put them on a path towards healing and reconciliation. As a church, our job is to continue to pray for and bring about that type of healing that Jesus Christ brought into the world. Be that reflection. And let us see that we can all be transfigured. And that's the fun part about this passage today. Transformation is to turn one thing into another thing. Transfiguration is to see the same thing, but to change it enough so that now our perspective is different and we see the truth. We've always been looking at what's happening around us. Well, now let's see it differently. Let's see it honestly. Let's recognize the authenticity that is here.